House meeting to order. We'll take bill requests, and we have one set of minutes to approve. Then I'll turn it over to Chair Tyson, and she can call the Senate tax meeting to order, since this is a joint meeting. So with that, are there any requests for bill introductions from the House side? If I need to stall, I've got one. If Representative Hoheisel, so mine is 26 RS 2553. This is on behalf of Advantage Capital. It is a Kansas Rural Business Growth Program designed to incent some business capital investments. So are there any questions or objections? Seeing none, the request is approved. And Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have two. They both will be from the same, on behalf of the same entity, Wichita Affordable Housing. The first one is RS 2570. This will be a sales tax exemption for nonprofits purchasing modular, manufactured, or mobile homes used for affordable housing. Would you like the second one, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, let's do them both at the same time, please.
RS 2573. This is a property tax exemption for nonprofits providing affordable housing, transitional housing, and emergency shelter housing.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, any questions or objections? Seeing none, the requests are approved. Are there any other House bill requests for introductions? Seeing none, House Committee, we do have one set of minutes from January 13th to approve. I mentioned those on our meeting Wednesday. If you've had a chance to approve those or take a look at those, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Motion by Representative Wolf, second by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay. Do we need, did I hear division? Okay, that concludes our preliminary business for the House side. I'd like to turn it over to Senator Tyson for the remainder of the, she'll serve as chair and I'll serve as vice co-chair or whatever you want to call me, but I'll turn it over to Senator Tyson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we're a good team. We flipped a coin, guys. So, no, he's a better debater than I am. We'll call the committee to order, and we do have a bill request. Randy, would you like to?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. On behalf of Randy Stuckey, on behalf of Renew Kansas Biofuels Association, we would request the introduction of RS 2539, amending the existing alternative fuel tax credit. Thank you.
Are there any questions on the request? Any objection to the request? We'll make the request. Committee will start out. We'll start out with the HPIP report. Kathleen, welcome to the Joint Tax Committee. It's been a while since we've done this.
I wasn't expecting to be called on first. I thought Eddie was going to get up here and do his song and dance. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Tyson and Chairman Smith and members of the two tax committees. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the department's findings in the High Performance Incentive Program credit. As a refresher, HPIP is a state program in Kansas that gives incentives to certain companies that agree to pay good wages, invest in their business, and train their workers. Basically, the entities that can qualify have to be a for-profit company subject to state taxes. They have to pay wages exceeding the average wage standard, and they have to be either a manufacturer or able to document that most of its sales are to Kansas manufacturers or out-of-state businesses. Also, a headquarters or back office operations can qualify as well, no matter what NAICS code they are in. The benefits of the HPIP program, there are several. First of all, HPIP does provide a 10% investment tax credit for the capital investment that the businesses make. It also allows for a sales tax exemption that can be used for the company's eligible capital investment for their qualified facility. It also allows a training tax credit of up to $50,000, and then they also have access to other programs through the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce is responsible for determining the eligibility for these companies and certifying these companies through the HPIP program. The Department of Revenue, we are responsible for the administration of the tax benefits of these certified companies, the processing of those tax credits, and the sales tax exemption as well. The High Performance Incentive Program began back in 1992, and there have been several legislative changes made over the years. It was first established as an income tax credit for investment, again, and for a training and education tax credit. In 1998, they added privileged taxpayers and premium taxpayers. In 2011, they changed the carry-forward period to 16 years for the investment credit from 10 years. In 2013, they changed the minimum threshold for investments in Douglas, Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, and Wyandotte to $1 million. For all the other counties, it's $50,000. And then in 2021, the legislation was changed to allow for those projects that were placed into service on or after 1/1/21, they can transfer up to 50% of their investment credit in a single tax year. So as the program has expanded and more entities are qualifying for the program, the complexity in maintaining accurate, timely, and comprehensive records has grown accordingly. Managing these records is resource intensive for the department and requires enhanced coordination within our department. The following factors contribute to challenges in our day-to-day administration of the HPIP program. First of all, there's our current tax system. Our current tax system is over 25 years old. So anything that we have, the limitations of that tax system, there are many. And we can only make enhancements to that tax system within a certain very small period of time within a tax year because of all the tax returns that are going through the processing. So we've got a very limited window with which to make enhancements if we are able to make enhancements. The pass-through entities also provide a level of complexity for us. Many firms that are certified through the HPIP program are pass-through entities, and as such, these credits have to be reported on the pass-through entity's return and the shareholder or partner or member's return. So we've got a double reporting, per se, of these credits on the two different tax returns. And about half of our, more than half of our certified entities are pass-through entities, around 56% right now. So the other 44% are actually C corporations. So we have to be able to track the credits by the original pass-through entity, and then we have to track the credits by the partners, shareholders, or members that are in that pass-through entity. And with the pass-through entity, the shareholders could be more pass-through entities. So we go down levels and levels and levels of different shareholders or partners in that specific pass-through entity. So we've, in some cases, for some of our certified entities, we've got thousands of shareholders that we have to track to ensure that there is no duplication of credit used by the pass-through entity and then by the shareholders. So we've got a lot of information that we need to track. The shareholders and partners and members also can change from year to year. So with that, then we have to track for that specific tax year, for that specific location, we have to track for those specific shareholders. So things change all of the time, and there's just a lot of complexity in trying to track all of this information. The 16-year carry forward, the full life of this credit from its issuance, possible transfer, and eventual use, it involves multiple steps, and it's 16 years. So that is a definitely long period of time to be able to carry forward credit. Some other complexity are the tax law changes, which I've already kind of gone over, and as well as the transferability. And I'm going to go into just a little bit more detail on some of this information. Given the complexities that we have involved in the volume of claims that we have for the HPIP credit, there are multiple steps in reviewing the tax return. So I kind of just want to give you a brief idea as to what we do when we look at these returns that are claiming the credit. First of all, we have to ensure that the entity is actually HPIP certified. So if the HPIP certification letter that has been completed by the Department of Commerce and sent to the taxpayer, if it is not attached to the actual income tax return, then we need to go and verify that they are actually certified. The Department of Revenue keeps an Excel spreadsheet with all of the certified entities on that Excel spreadsheet, the address, and I think that's about it. We have around 6,000 entries in our Excel spreadsheet for these certified entities, and there are approximately 1,200 that are HPIP certified. There's 6,000 entries, 1,200 unique entity FEINs with multiple locations. So all of those are listed, so that accounts for all the 6,000 entries. It's mind-blowing. We also have to review the Schedule K-59. The Schedule K-59 is what is actually attached to the income tax return to claim the tax credit. So we need to verify the details on the K-59 to ensure they are correct and they are matching with what has been reported from the previous year. So if there's carry forward coming from the previous year, it's reported on the current Schedule K-59. So we're just ensuring that everything is done correctly. We also have to review our tax processing system to ensure that everything that has been reported in the tax processing system is what is matching what we've got in our records. So we ensure that that is correct as well. And then the tracking of the credits. As a means of tracking the credit, we have had to develop individual spreadsheets for each HPIP certified entity. So we are doing all of this manually in reviewing all of our HPIP certified entities. So we keep a spreadsheet for each one of these entities. We list out the amount of investment that they have made, the calculation they have done. We list all of the shareholders, partners, or members that are in that pass-through entity, as well as their identifying number, and the split as to what percentage they get of the credit for the individual shareholders. So there's a lot of manual work that is done by the Department of Revenue to manage this program. Kansas Legislative Post Audit conducted a review of the tax credits that were awarded through the High Performance Incentive Program, and that audit was presented to the Legislative Post Audit Committee on September 16th of 2025. The audit specifically requested the amount of HPIP credit used in the last 5 years. KDOR did provide data to the Legislative Post Audit for that audit on August 13th of 2025, but LPA did not have time to review the data that we had provided. The Department of Revenue dedicated a staff member to review each HPIP certified entity to ensure that all information for that entity was accurate, complete, and up to date. And I think in the attachment that you got for my testimony, it kind of gives you what we did with this review. Each HPIP certified entity was reviewed beginning with the first year that they claimed the HPIP tax credit through the last tax year that they have claimed or that they have filed with us at this point. Updates were made to KDOR, our Excel spreadsheets, for that specific entity. If needed, we made corrections to our processing system. And if there were adjustments that needed to be made to notify the taxpayer, those were made as long as those were within the statute of limitations. We also reviewed our carry forward balance for the HPIP credit because I believe a lot of our legislators are concerned about the amount that we have sitting out there on the books. So we reviewed that, recalculated, and validated those numbers. So I wanted to provide you with a little bit of information as to what we have found based upon that review that we did. Again, just to reiterate, we've got 2 credits within the HPIP program. We've got the training and education tax credit, which is again a credit up to $50,000 for training and education expenditures that exceed 2% of the HPIP certified entity's payroll costs. That tax credit, there is no carry forward of that credit, there is no refund of that credit, and it's more or less a use or lose credit. Then we've got the investment tax credit. It is a tax credit equal to 10% for investment in excess of $50,000 for those businesses that are located in one of those non-metropolitan counties. And the threshold, again, is moved up to $1 million for those in Douglas, Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, and Wyandotte. That credit can be carried forward for 16 years. That's the investment credit. Okay, let's go over the numbers that you should have in front of you. We were asked to provide current HPIP numbers for tax years 19 through 2023. Hopefully everybody can see. Yes, okay, good. We've got training and education, and then we've got investment credit, and then we've got a total column over to the far right. We've also got the number of filers in that first few columns next to the tax year. The number of filers represents the number of HPIP certified entities that have filed a return and earned a high performance incentive program credit. The amount of credit claimed represents the amount of current year credit available. This amount for investment purposes does not include any prior year carry forward. Amount of credit allowed represents the amount of credit that has been allowed against the taxpayer's tax liability or the amount of credit that they have used for that specific tax year. The credit allowed can include new credit and carry forward credit that they are claiming on that specific tax return. Now, for any of those of you that are on the committee for legislative post-audit, the numbers that we presented in August, they're just a little bit different, but that can be attributed to our review of the returns that we have done at this point, and 22 and 23, those returns are continuing to be filed. So we receive returns every day. These numbers are going to all change tomorrow because of the returns. So there is a slight difference in the numbers that were presented in August, just so you are aware. Carry forward, I want to talk a little bit about that. To date, the department has calculated we have approximately $1.3 billion in credit that has been carried forward and can be used in the coming years. In addition, we can report that approximately $402 million in carry-forward credit has been moved off the books. That is not included in the 1.3. But we have moved off $402 million in HPIP carry-forward credit because the carry-forward period has expired or the business is closed. The amount of carry forward, the $1.3 billion, is attributable to 359 certified entities. Transfers. Again, during the 21 legislative session, Senate Bill 65 was passed, which permits an HPIP certified entity to transfer HPIP tax credits for projects placed into service on or after January 1 of 2021 to another entity or individual. They can transfer up to 50% of the credit that they have earned. In the event that the tax credit earned by the taxpayer and transferred to someone else, to a transferee, is later disallowed in whole or in part by us, the taxpayer that originally earned the credit is liable for repayment to the state in the amount disallowed. To date, we have received almost 200 transfers, and that accounts for around $117.6 million in investment credit that has been transferred. So now we've added another layer in which we need to track for all of these transferees. So that kind of just gives you an idea as to what we review, what we have done. We've spent a considerable amount of time studying the data, the tax returns, and the credit schedule, and our reporting mechanisms to identify any potential issues and to gain an understanding of the underlying complexities that we do have. We are not done. We will continue to review the information that we have and try to make things better as we move from day to day. But we do appreciate this opportunity today to go ahead and provide this information to you. With that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm sure there's a few questions out here. I would ask, first off, how many man-hours to use those spreadsheets do you spend on this process? Do you have an estimate on that?
I don't have any idea of the man-hours that are taken to keep those updated, but it's not a simple thing.
No, I understand that, and coming from the software world, I would make a suggestion that I think it would pay for itself to implement a database. Yeah.
We agree.
Okay. So thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathleen, thank you for presenting a wealth of information here. I was curious about the $1.3 billion, and I was interested to know, you also said that you had moved $402 million off the books that had expired. How much of that $1.3 billion, I'm not asking you to have a crystal ball here, but on average, do a lot of these, a large portion of this expire or just sit unused until they expire?
I can't, I can tell you what we have seen and what we will see. Since the credit is now allowed to be transferred for those projects that are placed into service on or after 1/1/21, you're not going to see that happen. People are going to be able to transfer it and use it. There are some bigger amounts in earlier years for maybe of just a very few taxpayers that fell off the books. But I can't, again, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you that whether they will be used or not, so.
Right, and that's kind of leads into my next part of the question, if that's okay, Madam Chair. Of this program, I mean, this program, Eddie said it's been around since the 80s, but 92. The transferability, the carry forward, were those original provisions or were those added? Do you have any idea when those were added? Because that seems like that's probably the cause of a lot of this.
The carry forward provision was always in there, and it used to be 10 years. So that was in there in 1992. And then it was changed to 16 years in 2011. And the transferability was put in 2021.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes, and Eddie is a rock star. He was saying those numbers right when you were, Kathleen. So, committee, any other questions? Representative Smith, I always say coach.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me, Kathleen, great job. You said, talked about salary twice. Are you talking like $25 an hour? What kind of salary are you talking?
Salaries with regards to,
You said you had to pay a certain.
you have to pay higher than average wage
Right.
in a specific area.
Right.
To be able, and to be able to participate in the program. And the Department of Commerce publishes that information on their website. And I can't tell you what those amounts are. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Representative Ayerkamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathleen, and forgive me if you mentioned this before, the transferability, you said that started up in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So does that just apply to HPIP rewards from granted and started in 2021 forward? It doesn't go backwards, correct?
It does not go backwards. It's actually for new credits that are placed into service on or after 1/1/21. They can transfer 50% of their earned tax credit.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. I'm sure we'll be asking for an update on this, and I know we have a budget hearing next week in the Senate Tax Committee, so if you could have an estimate on those man hours, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank
that
you.
meeting. Yeah, thank you. Committee will turn our attention now to the next presentation, Renewable Energy Generations in Other States. Thank you, Eddie.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. You should have a PowerPoint presentation from me regarding renewable energy generation in other states. Since I'm doing a song and dance, we're going to talk about where the wind comes sweeping down the plains this morning. But no, this is something that you might be wondering, why are we discussing this today? The first and most obvious reason is this is something that the Special Committee on Taxation took up at a couple of its meetings during the most recent interim. It examined specifically 2 different states today. Those are going to be 2 of the 3 states that I highlight for you in this presentation today. A third state was added at the request of the chairs since then for this presentation. But also, it's somewhat timely right now in Kansas. In 1999, Kansas the legislature enacted Senate Bill 45, which was somewhat of a tax omnibus act. It was the Tax Reform and Relief Act of 1999. There were numerous provisions, income, sales, and property taxes. Among those provisions, there was a property tax exemption specifically for renewable energy generating property. Fast forward from there 16 years to 2015 in House substitute for Senate Bill 91 in a bill that went through energy committees. because the subject of that bill was generally energy. It included changing from a renewable portfolio standard law to a renewable portfolio goal type law. But it also modified that exemption such that if the property received its conditional use permit and made its exemption application after December 31 of 2016, that exemption was for 10 years. And so we are now fast approaching that window where that 10-year time frame that 10-year clock will have resolved for projects that came under the law, under the limited law. And so we're going to start seeing these coming onto the tax rolls. Now, I should clarify that bill, it did make a couple of other changes. It also specified that these properties were not to be classified as public utilities, which would mean that they would default to commercial and industrial property under the Constitution. And also further that the tangible personal property was not eligible for the commercial and industrial machinery and equipment property tax exemption that was otherwise on the books for all property placed into service after, I believe, July 1 of 2006. And so this property was going to come onto the tax rolls as tangible personal property 10 years after it was first placed into service, and it would be Class 2 property, subclass 5, and the Constitution has specific language in Class 2, subclass 5, noting that that property goes on to the books as retail cost when new, less straight line depreciation. The straight line depreciation is its economic life or 7 years, whichever is shorter. Within this industry, this property has a longer economic life than 7 years, and so it uses 7-year straight line depreciation with a floor of 20% of the retail cost when new. Since the exemption is for more than 7 years, what this means is that all of this property, the appraisal and assessment of this property is actually much more straightforward than almost any other property in the state, because it's just retail cost when new, multiplied by 20%, and then multiplied by the relevant assessment ratio, which is 25% for that subclass of property. So it's actually a pretty easy and pretty clear valuation for this property. But we're getting to that point in time, and so that's why I discuss this today. And so what we'll discuss today are 3 states' approaches to taxation of sort of renewable energy generating property. Not necessarily renewable energy as that is defined in Kansas, but renewable as they use it in their states. We're going to look at what Nebraska does. That is a state that the Special Committee on Taxation had presented specifically to them. They have a nameplate capacity tax in lieu of their tangible personal property. We're going to look at what Wyoming does. They have a production-based tax that is in addition to their tangible personal property. And then we're going to look at what South Dakota does, and they use kind of somewhat of might be described as a hybrid approach here. They have both a nameplate capacity tax and a production tax, but they are in lieu collectively of the tangible personal property in South Dakota, tax in South Dakota. And so Nebraska, we'll look at them first. There we go. In 2010, Nebraska enacted a nameplate capacity tax. It kind of, it just realized that this was going to be a property that was likely to come into the state and was going to potentially have consequences that they wanted to specifically address in their statutes. And so they enacted a tax that was an alternative to the property tax. And one of the reasons that they did that is that under their regular personal property tax, this would have had a 5-year straight line depreciation schedule. That's just how taxation of this specific type of property works in Nebraska. And so what that would have meant for local governments is that they were getting a big spike in the local valuation in year 1 when the property comes on the books, but then it was going to disappear really rapidly. And so it was going to cause a lot of volatility for taxpayers in Nebraska because their tax rates would drop when that property came onto the books, but then as it depreciated quite rapidly, their tax rates would have gone right back up. And depending upon what the local governments did with that tax base, it might have almost had like a ratcheting type effect as it relates to the property taxes in Nebraska. So they wanted to take it outside of that tax scheme and have a different approach. So what Nebraska does is that they have a statutorily codified rate of $3,518 per megawatt hour. That is the same rate that Nebraska had on their statute at its time of enactment 16 years ago. The tax is due every year as of April 1st. And if just for tax administration purposes, if obviously these facilities don't typically come online on exactly January 1. I suppose that is possible, although there are likely industry reasons why it might not happen. And even if there aren't industry reasons why it might not happen, there's only a 1 in 365 chance that it would happen. And so they use a kind of a proration basis based upon the number of years in which they are online in the calendar year to determine it. The other thing that I have a specific note here as it relates to Nebraska is that the money within Nebraska is that it goes back to the counties where that specific facility is located, and then they use a pretty simple taxes assessed ratio for that county. So it's the taxes assessed by each individual taxing district divided by the sum of the total taxes assessed by all the taxing districts for that specific geography, and whatever that ratio is the fraction of the nameplate capacity tax that goes to that taxing entity. The other thing they have is Nebraska does have an expenditure limit for certain local governments, and so they actually, for the first 5 years, require the proceeds of this tax to go into funds such that it does not kind of boost the spending limit related to that tax expenditure limit. Their tax expenditure limit is somewhat nuanced. It, by and large, only applies to general purpose type funds. So that's kind of the lay of the land in Nebraska. Next, we'll talk about Wyoming. Wyoming has a production tax in addition to their property tax. However, their property tax, as it relates to this type of property, they don't have a separate public utilities type classification in Wyoming for property taxes, but they separate commercial and industrial, and the commercial is by and large more the retail type commercial that you might think of. And so this falls into that industrial class. And the average of statewide effective tax rate for industrial property in Wyoming is 0.74%. I do specifically highlight that because that is quite a bit lower than what commercial and industrial property has as an effective tax rate here in Kansas. And so that's what it would be for these for the applicable facilities in Wyoming. The other thing important to note for Wyoming is that it applies to wind facilities and nuclear facilities in Wyoming, but it does not apply to solar facilities. However, I visited with legislative staff in the state of Wyoming. There has been some legislative consideration in the state of Wyoming of extending this tax to also have it apply to solar facilities. Something that might be of interest as it relates to that application to different types of facilities is that Wyoming does not currently have any solar facilities or any nuclear facilities. There has been interest in possibly installing solar facilities, and also there is a nuclear facility in Wyoming that is going through the permitting process at this point in time. The nuclear tax was kind of added specifically with that facility in mind, because the nuclear facilities also specified that the nuclear facilities may be exempt if they are what is statutorily defined in Wyoming as an advanced nuclear reactor. Not being an energy staffer, I'm not prepared to speak to what exactly constitutes an advanced nuclear reactor, but we can provide that if anybody specifically wants to know. Part of their goal there is they wanted to direct the nuclear project that is in the pipeline into being one of these advanced nuclear reactors, whatever that happens to be for Wyoming. They also included that beginning in 2035, in order for that exemption to apply to nuclear facilities, they will be required to source at least 80% of their uranium from domestic mines in the United States. Talking to legislative staff in Wyoming, they did emphasize that is not actually a small hurdle, that this is the uranium mining in the United States is enough of a developing and not developed industry that it's no guarantee that location will be able to succeed in sourcing 80% from domestic mines, and that even if they are able to do so, they might have to pay some sort of premium on that domestically mined uranium. And so now we'll get to what the actual tax is in Wyoming. As it relates to wind facilities, it is $1 per megawatt hour produced in Wyoming, but there is no tax for the first 3 years that the facilities are in production. And that is they would then pay a partial tax per year in the event that it doesn't go into effect, doesn't go into production on January 1. I have solar here, but that should say nuclear. That is a typo on my part. I very much apologize for that. It is $5 per megawatt hour for nuclear facilities, but I do want to specifically highlight the previously noted potential exemption, and with Wyoming's intent being that this nuclear facility that is in development in Wyoming would be exempt from this tax, but they use the exemption terms to kind of shape the development of that facility. Of the revenues in Wyoming, about 40% goes to the state general fund, and about 40% goes back to the county, where it is then once again distributed to all of the local governments within that county. And so now we'll pivot on to what South Dakota does. This is one that was not presented to the Special Committee on Taxation, but they have both a nameplate capacity tax and a production tax. And in South Dakota, these are in lieu of the property taxes on these facilities. For wind facilities, they have a different rate depending upon when the facilities came online. And while our date is December 31st, 2016, as it relates to our property tax exemption, their date for the different rate is March 30th of 2015. And also different for Kansas relative to Wyoming is that their tax rate is actually higher for the older facilities. And so for facilities that came online prior to March 30th of 2015, they pay a tax of $0.00065 per kilowatt hour. And for those after that date, it is $0.00045 per kilowatt hour. Unfortunately, for purposes of this presentation, South Dakota couches theirs in terms of kilowatt hours as opposed to megawatts, which is or megawatt hours, which is the other approaches. And solar, however, it was enacted later. They have a uniform rate. They don't have bifurcated rates. I also don't think they have any applicable solar that would predate that March of 2015 date, but they have a rate for solar of 0.0090 per kilowatt hour of production. All facilities, solar and wind, regardless of the date of the facility, pay a $3 per kilowatt, which equates to $3,000 per megawatt if you want to reach back to the Nebraska tax for comparison purposes. But $3 per kilowatt nameplate capacity tax. Within South Dakota, obviously you can see there's more to this tax, and so there's also more complexity as it relates to the distribution of this. For the nameplate capacity tax, 100% of that amount goes back to the local governments. For the production tax, 80% of that goes to their equivalent of our state general fund, and 20% of that goes to the locals. Of all monies that go to the locals, that money is always split, no matter what the taxing differences between those local units of government are. 50% to the school district, 35% to the county government, and 15% to the township government where they are located. No other local governments get any of this tax proceeds. There's another distinction that as it relates to how that 50% of the local share that goes to schools is applied to their school finance formula in South Dakota. And so for pre-2016 wind farms, all of that money that goes to those school districts is counted as kind of local effort, which if you're trying to put that into parlance of what we have in Kansas is local foundation aid. And so that goes to, in essence, offset the state aid that the school districts receive. For facilities brought online after 2016, for the first 5 years, none of it is counted as local effort. So none of it serves to reduce the amount of state aid those school districts receive. But then for the next 5 years after that, it tapers into counting as local effort. So 20, 40, 60, 80, and then 100%. And then as of year 10, if it's a post-2016 facility, 100% of that amount going to school districts does count as local effort, which once again in Kansas is what we would refer to as local foundation aid, so it does serve to reduce their state aid. And so it's somewhat worth noting on this slide, I guess, that 50% going to the school district, while it does go to the school district, in reality that in essence serves to the benefit of the state eventually by the time you get to it, because it reduces their kind of state general fund spending obligations for their school finance formula. All right, so now what you're probably all wondering is if we had these sorts of laws in Kansas, what would this look like? And so on the next slide I have that information. However, this slide's really important before I get to it, so don't gloss over this slide. All of the data on here is 2024 data, and all of it comes from the EIA that KCC staff provided to our office, And it assumes that all of the facilities and all of the production would be applicable to the tax at the present rates in each of those states. So it ignores that kind of 2016 distinction. It ignores the kind of 3-year exemption rule that exists in those states. So that's the really important caveats. And also, since this is 2024 data, I believe, and this is my understanding of these industries, that since that point in time, the wind industry in Kansas has been relatively stable. And so the production and capacity amounts are probably continue to be pretty comparable today as they were in 2024. However, my understanding is that the solar industry is on an expansionary trend. And so these solar numbers probably would be quite a bit larger today than they were in 2024. So that being said, we'll get right into the numbers. The Nebraska tax, if it were in place in Kansas with those caveats that I stated on the previous slide, it would be about $32 million total that it would generate. All of that money would go to local governments, and here's where that highlight of wind being relatively stable but solar being expansionary right now in Kansas is probably important. 31.8 million of that under the 2024 numbers would have come from wind, and only 0.2 million of it would have come from solar. Moving on to the Wyoming tax, $75.8 million total is what that would have generated in Kansas. $30.3 million to the state, because remember they split it across state and locals. $45.5 million to locals. Once again, about 30 million of that, so pretty comparable to the Nebraska tax, would have come from the wind industry, and $46 million of that would have come from nuclear in Kansas. And I need to probably pause here and state that I made the assumption that Wolf Creek Power Plant would not meet Wyoming's statutory definition of an advanced nuclear reactor as it relates to that. Obviously, if it did, that number would be 0. But then beginning in 2035, they would have the same sort of obligation to source at least 80% of their uranium domestically. And then looking at South Dakota, if the South Dakota law were in place in Kansas, once again using those same 2024 numbers with the same caveats, it would have been $40.8 million total. 10.8 million of that to the state, 30.4 million to the locals, and 15 million of that 30.0 million would have gone to the school districts, which as I mentioned, over time phases to the benefit of the state in essence by reducing the amount of state aid to schools. 40.5 million of that would have come from the wind sector. Of that 40.5 million, 27.1 million is attributable to the capacity tax, and 13.4 million to the production tax, and 0.3 million would have come from the solar industry collectively, 0.2, about 2/3 of that from the capacity tax, and 1/3 of that to the production tax. Yeah, and so that is kind of the summary of these states' tax policies as it relates to renewable energy generation property and how they might apply to Kansas in a very oversimplified kind of way of looking at it. But with that, I would stand for whatever questions you all might have.
Committee, any questions? Doesn't look like any. Eddie, Chairman Smith.
I was going to let you go first. Eddie, on this last slide here, you've done those state analysis. Did you do one for Kansas? I mean, these were in lieu of kind of that the tangible personal property tax. What would it look like if we did nothing and they just go in under tangible personal property in Kansas?
So these are all based on 2024 numbers. So in order to do that in Kansas, you would need to pick a year specifically for me, because that would determine which of the facilities came online. Now, if you wanted me to assume all facilities are online at their 20% floored amount, I could do that separately. But that is a little different than the way this would apply. I would need some assumptions, I guess.
Right, okay. And also, do we have access, currently some of these, specifically the wind farms, currently have pilot agreements, payment in lieu of taxes, currently going to typically your local governments. Do we have access to that to know, would research be able to quantify that, or is that private information that would?
I think we could probably get most of the way there, is probably the best way to describe it. The way, some of those are relatively straightforward and some of them are more complicated. What we do have is the total amount of payment in lieu of taxes, but wind farms, while they do, I believe, make up the majority of total pilot monies in Kansas in this day and age, many exempt properties also, other exempt properties also have payments in lieu of taxes. And so the way that data gets reported at the county and state level is just the aggregate. Now, I believe working with the industry and also with the department, we can get, like I said, most of the way there, but getting it down to an exact dollar amount can be a challenge.
Yeah, I'd just be curious to see how those numbers compare.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Representative Corbett.
So Eddie, in these other states, the money that's coming in, is it earmarked for property tax or just general budget?
So in Nebraska, they have, as I mentioned, they have kind of a specific approach to this that does, at least in the first 5 years, kind of result in it offsetting property tax and not just going to the base budget. Otherwise, it is just money that goes to the locals, whether they use it to expand their spending or reduce their other tax sources, of which property tax might be one or the most significant. That's kind of a local decision.
Thanks.
Representative Alcala.
I'm Tobias Schlingensief, filling in for John Alcala today, subbing in.
My apologies.
Not at all, not at all. So, because I'm subbing in and I'm just curious, is this exercise a way of trying to change the way that taxation on wind farms, nuclear, et cetera, might be looked at in the state with the view to raising additional revenue? Is this something that helps those energy providers maybe calculate better the risks and benefits of operating in Kansas? What's motivating the exercise? Just curious.
So our office has no position as it relates to what policies. I'm just providing the information that the chairs requested that I provide. They might be more able to speak to that.
Representative, we're taking a look at all the aspects of taxing in the state of Kansas for the potential of possibly lowering property taxes.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you for your answer.
Eddie, I would ask, I find it a little bit interesting that the capacity tax is greater than the production tax. Is that just an anomaly for 2024? I don't know if you would have had a chance to look at the other years. It seems to me like that says these items are just standing in Kansas and not producing.
No, that's kind of just the way the South Dakota tax is set up. The capacity tax applies annually, and the production tax applies as it is produced. And so South Dakota could have had higher production rates and lower capacity rates and had a different outcome with that as it relates to the industry as it stands in Kansas, but their legislature decided that this is how they wanted to enact it.
Okay, so it could be the numbers itself. I'd like to take a deeper dive into that because it is curious that the capacity is higher. Committee, any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this information. I recognize that we're going to see some of the investment in wind come on taxes, and I'm wondering when you compare it to the Nebraska tax, some of the tax, the property tax, will go to the school districts, and then that revenue will help offset what the state needs to provide for those school districts. Have you looked at that? I mean, I think that would be a difficult thing to compare because everyone has a different school finance formula.
Yeah, but I think to your point, as those properties do come onto the Kansas tax rolls, they will be subject to the full mill levy, of which includes no longer the 1.5 state mills, but it does include the 20 mills, which while they are technically levied by the school districts, do go to serve to offset state general fund spending for schools. So it would have kind of the same offsetting effect as that policy does in South Dakota for schools. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Eddie. Committee, I don't think there's any other business to be brought before us. I want to thank you for staying late on a Thursday afternoon, and especially thank John and Leah. We just show up. I know staff, it's a similar meeting, different time frame, but John and Leah, it took a little bit of work to coordinate, so thank you very much. Mr. Chairman?
No, I'd just echo those comments. Thank you to everybody for their engagement. We decided it might be a little more efficient. We wanted this presentation before both committees, so we thought a joint meeting would be a good idea. And just want to thank you for that idea.
Thank you, and thanks for hosting.
Okay. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.